They laughed because they thought they knew who he was. Just another forgotten face in the crowd. Just another man sitting on the ground, dirty clothes, unshaven beard, holding an empty cup and staring into nothing. To them, he was nothing more than that, a nobody. But the truth is, the world is full of silent warriors. Men and women who carry scars no one sees. People who fought battles no one knows about. Heroes who became invisible until the day the world needs them again. On that ordinary afternoon in Austin, Texas, a group of arrogant young men thought it would be funny to humiliate a man they believed was weak. They laughed, mocked him, recorded videos on their phones. They tossed coins on the ground as if throwing crumbs to an animal. They thought they were in control, that they were in command of the situation, that they were superior. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly imagine, was that this man had served 22 years as a Delta Force operator, an elite soldier trained in the most lethal and precise techniques in the world. A ghost, as he was known. A survivor, and when a woman screamed for help that same day, when a knife glinted under the sun, when an innocent life was at risk, they learned too late that the man they humiliated wasn't weak. He wasn't broken. He wasn't a nobody. He was John Ghost Riley. And ghosts do not run. This is the story of a veteran the world tried to forget. A man who once saved lives in missions the government would never acknowledge. A soldier who carried the weight of war, and after that, the weight of silence. But today, his silence would be broken. Throughout this story, you will see what happens when arrogance meets discipline. When cruelty meets someone who has endured things no civilian could ever imagine. When wickedness crosses paths with honor. And before we continue, I need to ask you something. If stories like this and stories of justice, honor, resilience, and redemption speak to your heart, then subscribe now to Warrior Resurgence, because here we give a voice to the forgotten. Here we remember those the world tries to ignore. And here we celebrate what never dies. The strength of a true warrior. Now, prepare yourself. Because this story will change the way you see the invisible people around you. Life in Capitol Square had always been an organized chaos. Tourists, students, hurried workers, street performers, food vendors, all mixed into a constant symphony of noise. It was the kind of place where no one truly saw anyone, where everyone was too busy to look another person in the eyes. And it was in a place exactly like this that John Riley vanished from the world's sight. At 52 years old, John's body was marked by injuries that didn't show beneath the worn-out clothes he wore. Scars crossed his ribs and shoulders like maps of battles no one would ever know. His knees cracked with every movement, reminding him of the freezing nights in Kandahar and the nighttime jumps that nearly ended his life. But what truly weighed on him were the scars inside. Those who have never been to war believe it ends when the soldier comes home. But John knew, and every veteran knows, that war never ends. It only changes shape. It trades gunfire for silence, explosions for memories, adrenaline for emptiness. And slowly, it consumes the soul. John had no family, no home anymore, no command, no mission. And when a warrior loses his mission, he loses his compass. That's how he ended up in the square, with a small tattered blanket, a paper cup, and an old backpack carrying the little he had left in his life. But unlike what the young men thought, John wasn't begging for money. He was observing, all the time, every day, every person, every sound, every movement around him. It was impossible to turn off the instinct. An operator's brain never stops, never relaxes, never stops analyzing threats. And so, while the city passed by him, John mapped everything in silence. He knew the man in the gray suit who walked by every Monday at 2 p.m. was having an affair. He noticed it from the gestures, the timing, the urgency. He knew the young woman who jogged around the square always pretended to be on the phone when she felt watched. He knew the street musician playing guitar had arthritis in his right index finger. He could tell by the way he pressed the strings. And he also knew that, for 3 weeks straight, a group of young men had been mocking him. Chad, Tyler, Mark, and the last one, whose name he never learned and wasn't worth knowing. They always arrived the same way, laughing loudly, shoving each other, cursing, filming everything. To them, John was a toy. And on that particular day, John already knew they were coming before he even heard their voices. The rhythm of their steps, the impact of rubber soles on concrete, the pattern of their laughter. It was impossible to confuse. Chad was the first to approach. Backwards cap, expensive t-shirt, clean sneakers, the perfect symbol of someone who had never faced anything in life. "Look, guys, our favorite veteran is still here," he said with a venomous smile. John didn't react. Eyes fixed on the ground, posture relaxed, but alert. But Chad needed attention. He needed a reaction. "Wake up, Grandpa. Did the army leave you here as punishment? Huh?" he mocked. Tyler laughed loudly, almost screaming. "Bro, this guy smells worse than the school bathroom." Mark filmed everything. "Let's make a TikTok with him today. It'll go viral." They thought it was entertainment. John took a deep breath. Slow, controlled. He had learned to breathe like that during missions where any change in rhythm could mean death. Breathing was a weapon, a way to keep the mind in place. But Chad mistook calm for weakness. "Catch," Chad said, tossing a coin that landed far from John's cup. "Go fetch it for us." Laughter exploded. John stood up carefully. Not because he was weak, but because he was tired of wars. As he walked toward the coin, Chad commented, "Look at that dude. He walks like a broken robot." More laughter. John picked up the coin, placed it in the cup, sat back down, and then he felt something different in the air. Danger. His instinct alerted him. His posture shifted, his shoulders aligned. And then John saw it. A trembling man walking fast, hand inside his jacket pocket, following a distracted young woman. This was the setup for millions of crimes. But on that day, the attacker had chosen the wrong place. Because he had chosen to hurt someone right in front of a Delta Force operator. The square had its own rhythm, a dance of footsteps, car horns, mixed voices, and distant music from street performers trying to survive in the middle of the chaos. But on that day, for John Riley, the loudest sound wasn't the traffic, the conversations, or the music. It was the laughter. The boys' laughter. The kind of laughter that doesn't come from joy, but from cruelty. Chad and his friends arrived earlier that day. It was as if they had scheduled a new fun session at the expense of someone who hadn't even chosen to participate. John identified them before he even saw them. The cadence of their steps, the pattern of their conversations, the arrogant energy. Everything gave away their arrival. They were predictable. They were loud. They were weak. But weakness, when gathered together, becomes boldness. Chad was the first to approach. He walked as if he owned the square, chest puffed out, long strides, loud voice, the self-confidence typical of someone who had never faced real loss. "Look at this, guys," Chad said with fake surprise. "Our hero is still here. Not saving anyone today?" His friends laughed. The sound echoed off the nearby walls. Hollow laughter, empty laughter, the laughter of those who have never felt real pain. John didn't lift his eyes, but he heard. He noticed. He analyzed. Tyler stepped closer with his phone in hand. "Hey, old man, do you mind if we record a video? It's just a joke," he asked with a cruel smile. To Tyler, life was content. To Tyler, pain was engagement. John remained seated, looking at the ground, not out of fear, but because he saved his energy for what truly mattered. Chad noticed that his initial provocations hadn't caused any real reaction, and that irritated him. Because his ego depended on control, and being unable to control someone he considered inferior frustrated him deeply. "I'm talking to you, old man," Chad said, stepping even closer. "Or are you deaf? Or are..." The laughter returned. The circle of humiliation began to form. And just like predators in the African savanna do with their prey, the boys began to close in, surrounding John. But the difference was that John wasn't prey. Could never be. Didn't know how to be. But they didn't know that. A coin appeared between Chad's fingers. He lifted it, showing it to his friends as if he were a magician about to perform a trick. "Want to earn 5 cents, old man?" Chad asked. "Let's see if you deserve it." The coin hit the ground, but not nearby. Far away. as if Chad were training John to behave like a pet. "Go fetch," Chad said. His friends burst into laughter. John stood up slowly. Tyler laughed loudly, pointing. "He's going. He's gonna fetch it." John walked to the coin. Calm, silent, unhurried. The laughter grew louder. Chad didn't just want to humiliate him. He wanted to see pain. He wanted to see shame. He wanted to see submission. But John gave none of that. He picked up the coin, placed it in the cup, sat down again, as calmly as before. That wounded Chad more than any visible reaction would have. Humiliating someone who won't react is pointless, and that enraged Chad. "I said, look at me when I talk to you," Chad shouted, shoving John's shoulder. The impact was weak, almost comical, the kind of shove a boy gives, not a man. But what frightened Chad was the fact that John didn't budge, didn't wobble, didn't move an inch. It was as if he'd pushed a concrete pillar. Chad's smile trembled. For a second, just a second, he felt fear. And then, like every coward, he turned that fear into anger. "What's the matter, old man? What are you gonna do? Hit me?" he mocked. Nothing. John kept his eyes on the ground, but his mind was elsewhere. Calculating, observing, analyzing. He knew something was wrong that day. Something beyond the boys. Something more dangerous. Instinct screamed. His body remembered. His blood warned him. And then came the moment that changed everything. Mark, the most aggressive of the four, approached with a cup of coffee in hand. "Hungry, old man? Thirsty?" he taunted. "Want a sip?" And before anyone could predict it, Mark poured the cup over John's shoe. Hot coffee streamed over the already worn leather boot. The boys erupted in laughter. "Look at this," Tyler said, filming everything. "This is gonna go so viral." John lowered his eyes to his shoe, but not because of the coffee or the pain. He was observing something else, something behind the boys, something no one had noticed. The young woman walking with her head down, distracted, earbuds in her ears. And behind her, the trembling man with restless eyes, hand inside his jacket pocket. There was the real danger. And when John lifted his gaze again, Chad saw it. For a fraction of a second, he saw something in that man's eyes, something that froze him. It wasn't anger, it wasn't fear, it was focus. The focus of someone who is about to act, the focus of someone who has done this before, the focus of a soldier. "What's wrong, old man?" Chad asked, trying to maintain superiority. "Scared?" John answered for the first time. "You guys always come here at this time?" Silence fell for an instant. Chad shook his head, laughing. "What? Gonna put it on your calendar? Gonna run from us?" But John wasn't talking to them. He wasn't asking them. He was confirming something for himself. The movement of the square, the schedules, the routines, the escape routes, everything aligned in that instant, and before the boys could make more jokes, the first scream echoed through the square. A real scream. A sharp scream, a desperate scream. "Help, please. Someone help me." And in that exact second, John Riley stopped being invisible. The scream cut through the square like a gunshot, the kind of sound that doesn't come from accident or surprise, but from pure fear. That help carried real panic. And for John Riley, it wasn't just a cry for assistance. It was a call, a distant echo of nights in Kandahar when civilians begged for help, a conditioned reflex awakening like a sleeping animal. His body reacted before his mind could form a thought. He stood up, slowly, but with purpose, like a machine finally receiving the command it had been waiting for. His silence was intense. So intense that even the boys noticed the shift in the air. Chad narrowed his eyes. "What's up, old man? Are you deaf or—" But his voice died when he saw John's face. That was not the face of a homeless man, not the face of a defeated man. It was the face of someone who had entered mission mode. Focused eyes, slow breathing, upright posture. John wasn't looking at them anymore. He was looking beyond them, toward the side street where the danger was happening. The young woman was still screaming. Her hands trembled as the attacker yanked her purse violently. the blade of the knife glinting in the light. "Give me the bag now!" the robber barked. The woman tried to back away, but he shoved her against the wall. Her fear spread through the air. The whole square seemed to hold its breath. But no one moved. No one except John. He took the first step, then the second, then the third. And with every step, something in the environment shifted. The energy changed. The atmosphere changed. It was as if the world recognized who he truly was. Chad watched, wide-eyed. "Dude, look how he's walking." Tyler swallowed hard. That's military stuff, man." Mark started recording, but this time, his hands were shaking. They were about to witness something they never should have provoked. John walked with calculated precision, a slight drift to the left to stay out of the attacker's peripheral vision too early. A subtle adjustment of posture, redistributing weight in his legs. Dominant hand free, eyes locked on the attacker's wrist. Every step was a study, a diagnosis, an instinctive preparation. It was like watching a lion that had finally chosen to attack. The assailant noticed movement in the corner of his eye and yelled, "Back off, old man. This is none of your business." John didn't answer. His silence was more threatening than any verbal warning. The attacker stepped forward, raising the knife. "I said back off," Chad whispered, breathless. He's not scared." Tyler shook his head. "No, not scared. That's something else." It was discipline. It was focus. It was restrained lethality. John was only a few meters away. 3 more steps and he'd be in optimal range. 2 more and he could engage. 1 more. Time slowed down. Inside John's mind, precise calculations fired automatically. Distance to attacker, 2.5 meters. Weapon, medium-sized blade. Attacker's dominant hand, right. Posture, unstable, aggressive, emotional. Victim, cornered, panicking, 0 escape opportunity. Approach angle, lateral, outside the direct line of the knife. A classic high-stress disarm scenario, something John had done more times than he could count. In destroyed houses, in dark alleys, in muddy backstreets of Iraq, in silent corridors of Afghanistan, but never in a public square in Austin. The attacker took a threatening step toward John. "I swear I'll cut you, move!" And then, John moved. The transition was so fast that the boys shouted, not in fear but in disbelief. In less than a second, John sidestepped out of the attack line, positioned himself beside the attacker, and seized the wrist holding the knife with almost scientific precision. The blade flashed in the air for a moment, not because it was being used, but because it was being removed from the equation. John twisted the assailant's wrist at an angle no normal person would ever dare attempt. The joint popped. The attacker screamed. The knife fell, clattering on the ground. But John wasn't done. In one fluid motion, a motion requiring years of training to execute so perfectly, he slammed the criminal onto the ground. The attacker hit the concrete with a dull, brutal thud. The air rushed out of his lungs in a helpless groan. John placed his knee at the precise spot between the scapula and the spine, a critical point that makes resistance impossible. His left hand controlled the attacker's free arm. His right hand kept the twisted wrist locked without unnecessary violence, but with absolute dominance. The attacker was no longer a threat. He was just a body trying to understand what had happened. "What are you?" he screamed, his voice trembling with pain and shock. John replied with the same calm he'd shown throughout the entire intervention. "Someone who doesn't let people get hurt." The silence that followed was almost sacred. The woman began to cry, now out of relief. She dropped to her knees, hand over her mouth, shaking. Someone in the square shouted, "He saved her. That homeless guy saved her life." Another added, "That wasn't just saving. The way he moved. That's professional." Chad felt his stomach twist. This wasn't a trick. It wasn't luck. It wasn't coincidence. He finally understood. The old homeless man wasn't a failure. He was a soldier, a warrior, a man trained to do exactly that, protect. Mark by now couldn't even lift his phone. His hands trembled too much. "Dude," he whispered. That was That was like Delta Force. Tyler stared at him. You think he's... Chad finished the thought, his voice cracking. He's not who we thought he was. No, not even close. The man they mocked had just executed a flawless takedown worthy of special forces. And in that moment, the boys realized the truth that life eventually teaches everyone. You never know who you're messing with. The crowd began to gather. Some people filmed, many were in shock, others in awe. And in that organized chaos, one thing became undeniable. John was not invisible, not anymore. As sirens echoed in the distance, growing louder, Chad felt guilt crush his chest like a weight he couldn't carry. Shame consumed him. But nothing would prepare him for what would happen when the officer arrived. Nothing. Because in that moment, John Riley's identity would no longer be a secret, and the entire square would witness a revelation that would change everything. The sound of the siren cut across the square like a flash of light in a dark sky. For most people there, it was just another patrol car arriving to deal with a common problem. A robbery, maybe a fight, something routine. But for John Riley, it was a memory. A distant echo of helicopters over Fallujah. The noise of improvised ambulances in forward operating bases. The metallic wail of makeshift sirens in villages torn apart by war. For a man like John, a siren never meant safety. But now, on this day in that square, it meant an ending. The end of invisibility. The end of humiliation. The end of the false perception the world had of him. Because in a few moments, the truth would appear. Clear, undeniable, impossible to hide any longer. The police officer jumped out of the vehicle quickly, hand on his holster, eyes alert. The crowd instinctively opened a path, as if understanding without being told that it was best not to interfere. And then the officer saw. He saw the attacker on the ground, completely subdued. He saw the victim a few feet away, trembling but alive. He saw the knife lying safely out of reach, perfectly removed from the danger zone. And he saw John. The posture, the placement of the knee, the control of the wrist, the way his left hand prevented the attacker from moving his elbow. The pressure applied to the exact point between the scapula and the spine, an advanced immobilization technique used only by highly trained groups. The officer narrowed his eyes. He knew that technique, not just knew it, he recognized it. That movement wasn't improvised. It wasn't learned at basic police academies. It wasn't something a civilian would pick up from watching online videos. It was elite military training, and a very specific kind. The officer took 2 steps forward, barely noticing that his voice cracked for a moment. "Sir," he said hesitantly. "May I ask your name?" John didn't answer immediately. He continued restraining the attacker, ensuring the man didn't try anything until he was handcuffed. The officer repeated, adding detail this time. "Your name, sir, is it John Riley?" Chad felt the world stop. Tyler's eyes widened. Mark dropped his phone. The name meant nothing to them at first, but the way the officer spoke it, the reverence, the tremor in his voice, the shift in posture, that meant everything. Finally, John lifted his head. His gaze was firm, not proud, not arrogant, accepting. "Yes," he answered. The officer inhaled sharply. "My God," he whispered. "It's an honor, sir." The entire square went silent. Sergeant Major John Ghost Riley. The officer continued, almost unable to believe it. "Is it really you?" A chill ran down Chad's spine. John Ghost Riley. This wasn't a common name. Not just any name. It was a name whispered in unofficial reports, in stories told across military bases, in rumors among officers who studied advanced defense tactics. It was an undocumented legend, a Tier 1 operator, Delta Force, 22 years of service, classified missions, record-breaking rescues, tactics taught behind closed doors. And now, he was right here, holding an attacker on the ground, and they had laughed at him. The crowd began to whisper, "Riley? Sergeant Major? Delta? No way. Is this real?" The victim placed a hand on her chest, emotional. He saved my life. And now I find out he's all that? The officer approached to finish the arrest. Sir, you can release him now. I'll take over. John loosened his hold and stood up. The crackling of his knees revealed years of wear, years of missions, but his posture remained straight, solid, strong. The attacker groaned on the ground, still unable to comprehend what had happened. What the hell? He muttered, dazed. Who are you? The officer answered before John could. He's someone you never should have tried to take on. Chad wished he could disappear. He wanted to run, wanted to dig a hole and bury himself in it. Everything he had done for the past weeks, every tossed coin, every laugh, every humiliation, now carried weight. Real weight. Moral weight, because he hadn't mocked an old homeless man. He had mocked a soldier who risked his life for people like him, a man who had seen death more times than anyone there could imagine, someone who didn't deserve any of what they had done to him. Chad felt sick. Oh my God, he whispered to his friends. What did we do? The others said nothing. They didn't know what to say. They didn't know how to repair the irreparable. For the first time, Chad understood his true size in the world. A spoiled kid. A cruel kid. A kid far too small to understand the value of the man he had been humiliating. And for the first time, he felt shame. Real shame. The officer approached John with a respectful posture. Sir, if you need help, if you need shelter, food, assistance, please speak to me. We will do whatever is necessary. John shook his head. Thank you, officer. But I'm all right for now. The I'm all right was typical of veterans. Even when they weren't, the woman who had nearly been robbed approached, tears in her eyes. I don't know how to thank you, she said, voice breaking. You saved my life. You saved me. John looked away. Receiving gratitude was always difficult for him. He simply replied, You're safe. That's what matters. She wiped her tears with her sleeve. You're a hero. A real one. John didn't answer. The word hero had always made him uncomfortable. Heroes get celebrated. He hadn't been celebrated. He had been forgotten. But hearing it still touched him. The entire square looked at John with a mix of admiration and respect, and now, the boy's shame demanded a conclusion. Chad took a deep breath and stepped forward. His legs trembled. His hands were sweating. Mr. Riley, he began, his voice almost failing. I need to talk to you. John turned slowly. Chad felt the weight of the ex-soldier's gaze, not judgmental, but as if he could see right through him. What is it? John asked calmly. Chad swallowed. I wanted to apologize. Not just for today, but for everything. I didn't know who you were. I didn't know what you had been through. John interrupted him with a gentleness Chad never expected. You didn't need to know who I was. You only needed to know I'm a human being. The sentence hit Chad like an emotional punch. He blinked quickly, trying to keep the tears from forming. I promise I'll never be that kind of person again, I swear. John nodded. That's a good start. The square breathed again. John returned to his place. He sat down, adjusted his backpack, picked up his cup. But something was different. He was no longer invisible. He was seen. He was acknowledged. He was honored. And for the first time in a very long while, he felt there might still be a place for him in this world. Because a man only becomes invisible when the world stops looking. And that day, the world looked at John Riley again. The square was beginning to calm down, but a different kind of energy lingered there, hovering over everyone like a silent reminder of what they had just witnessed. For many, the incident would become just a story to tell at home. For others, it would be a wake-up call. For the woman whose life had been saved, it would be a turning point. But for John Riley, it was more than that. It was the first moment in a very long time when he didn't feel invisible. And invisibility is a burden few truly understand. The sun was slowly dipping behind the buildings on the Austin skyline, painting the sky with shades of orange and gold that reflected off the office windows. The heat of the day still lingered, but now it mixed with a gentle coolness of late afternoon. The square, once filled with chaotic sounds, had fallen into a peculiar silence. Not a silence of fear, nor awkwardness. A silence of respect. People glanced at John from time to time, not with pity but with consideration. A kind of look he hadn't received since he wore a uniform every day. John took a deep breath. A long, heavy, yet peaceful breath. As if something inside him had shifted back into its rightful place. A piece of his soul returning home. The woman who had been attacked had already been taken by paramedics for evaluation. She insisted on hugging John before stepping into the ambulance. A sincere, emotional, grateful embrace. "You saved my life," she repeated, tears in her eyes. John simply nodded, not entirely sure how to handle that kind of gratitude. He had spent years hearing forced thanks from politicians, protocol-driven praise from superiors, and cold recognition in military reports. But that hug, it was real, and it had been a long time since he felt something real coming from someone. Chad remained a few yards away, arms crossed, unable to leave. His friends were there too, but now they weren't laughing, weren't filming, weren't mocking. They could barely lift their eyes to meet John's. They seemed smaller, not physically, emotionally. Arrogance had evaporated, ignorance had dissolved, guilt had taken its place. Chad's breathing was uneven, as if he were trying to gather courage he wasn't sure he possessed. Finally, he stepped forward once more. "Mr. Riley," he called softly in a voice so low it almost dissolved into the wind. Can I talk to you again?" John looked at him neutrally. No anger, no hostility, just presence. "You may," John replied. Chad swallowed hard. "I know you already forgave me, but I wanted to say something." John stayed silent, allowing him to continue. "Today, when I saw what you did, that opened my eyes. I've never seen anyone move like that. I've never seen courage like that. And I realized I had no idea what kind of pain people carry." Chad wiped a hand across his face, ashamed. "I only saw what was on the outside, the dirt, the clothes, the cup. And I thought that defined you. I thought I could laugh at you without consequences." He took a shaky breath. "But you're a giant. And I was nothing." The silence between them was long, intense. John finally responded, "You're not nothing. You just didn't know who you were yet. But now, you have the chance to find out." Tears filled Chad's eyes, for the first time in many years. I promise I'll be better." "Really?" John nodded. "Then start today." Chad stepped back, breathing deeply, feeling the weight, but also the lightness and of forgiveness. And then came an unexpected moment. An elderly woman walking with short, careful steps approached John. She held a grocery bag in her hands. "My son," she said gently, "please accept this." She placed before him a warm meal in a plastic container, some fruit, and a cold bottle of water. John tried to refuse, as he always did. His military pride still rose in his chest whenever someone offered help, but the woman touched his hand softly and said, "The world has been too harsh on you. Let someone be kind today." John couldn't bring himself to say no. "Thank you, ma'am," he murmured, deeply moved. She smiled. "My husband served in Vietnam. I recognize the eyes, your eyes. Men like you never truly come back from war. But today I think I saw you come back a little." John looked away, blinking slowly as if trying to keep the emotion from spilling out. The woman walked on, but the impact of her words stayed. Night began to approach. Lights flickered on. The air grew cooler. The square started to empty. And John stayed there for a moment, looking up at the sky. He remembered nights in Afghanistan, lying on dunes, staring at stars that looked brighter than any earthly beacon. He remembered missions with no return guarantee. He remembered broken promises. He remembered the faces of the men he lost. But tonight was different. Tonight he felt something he hadn't felt since before the war. Hope. Hope that goodness still existed. that purpose still existed, that he wasn't just a shadow walking among the living. He was seen again, recognized, respected. And then when the square was almost empty, John stood, his old backpack hanging from one shoulder, his light jacket covering the marks he carried, his posture tired but steady. He walked slowly, feeling every step, not as defeat, but as rebirth. Something inside him had changed that day, something deep. At the last corner before leaving the square, he stopped. He looked back. He saw the bench where he had spent weeks. He saw the shadow where he hid from the sun. He saw the place where he had been humiliated, and the place where he rose again. He took a deep breath, and then he smiled. A small, quiet, but genuine smile. The kind of smile that appears only when a man finds again a piece of himself he thought he had lost forever. Never judge someone by their appearance. You don't know the wars that person has already fought. You don't know the losses they carry. And most importantly, you don't know the strength they're hiding. John Riley proved that courage is never lost. He proved that a warrior never stops being a warrior, even when the world tries to erase him. And that honor, when it's real, never dies. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of the strength that lives inside every survivor, then subscribe now to Warrior Resurgence. Leave your like, share the message, and tell us in the comments, what was the moment in your life when you discovered your true strength? Until the next story, warrior.